So today I spent about 40 minutes drawing in InDesign. Admittedly, a weird thing to do because InDesign is not really a drawing tool, but we'll circle back to that in a minute. What's up? This is Joshua, MVA Studio. First off, if you're one of the people that is expecting these to show up daily and then they're not coming daily, I apologize. There is a good reason for it. I posted a clip the other day from a workshop I was teaching. When I do these 3-hour workshops, they eat up all my mental faculties because the way I prepare for them is pretty much 5 days a week. I drive from my house to my office and run through teaching the workshop, like talking it through, and it zaps my ability to think about anything else for that time. But I also miss making videos, and I would prefer that they be daily. So I'm going to attempt to strike a balance between these two things. That's that. Anyway, thanks for joining me. So if you look at something like the MVA Studio on Instagram, some of the things that you'll see is like these elementary typographic studies. Like I did some recently exploring the idea of density, which was a workshop I was running with my intro to typography class. And then when I have them working, I like to work on the same thing. So there's some studies from that. And then I've been doing these studies of just the letter M. I think it's just a Helvetica bold M. It might be a Helvetica medium M. It doesn't really matter, I suppose. And testing out visual effects on it. And then today, I just spent some time drawing in InDesign, which is an idea that had been kicking around in the back of my head for a bit. And it came out of working on some presentations last semester where I was putting drop shadows on stuff, but I was making these ridiculous like cyan drop shadows with the noise level up to 100. So they looked almost more like bitmappy photocopies. It was something that was interesting to me and something that I wanted to explore. And so I had been thinking I should just do a series or like a practice of just using native InDesign drawing tools. Really all I used was the rectangle tool today. And then just playing with the visual effects. And so there's two parts to what I'm going to talk about here. The first is, I'm not the kind of person who likes to learn how to do things while I'm on a project. Sometimes you have to do that, and that's fine. But I prefer that when I'm on a project that I can draw off everything I know how to do and then apply it to the project. I don't like having to go learn some illustration technique while I'm in the midst of doing something. Or in the MVA's work, that happens less and less. When I worked in agencies, it felt like it happened a lot. The creative director gets an idea in their head like, oh, what if we do something like this? And then you have to go make it. There is some value to someone paying you to learn how to do something, no doubt. But for me, it feels so artificial that it never felt like I learned how to do anything, because it wasn't coming organically from me or my skill set. My preferred way of learning how to do things is to do it in an open-ended, fun fashion. So, what am I trying to say? Fuck. One of the things I've become interested in doing with my work is getting it to a more formal place. Formal meaning concerned with the visuals. Earlier, like when I was a student and kind of early on in my career, I was really into the idea of formalism, but because I didn't have an art making practice, it was a very artificial thing. It was looking at other work and kind of like mimicking it or copying it. I didn't have the understanding that someone like the group Tomato or a David Carson or whoever, the way that they were working is they were playing and researching and learning stuff, and they were improvising it, and they were following their gut instincts to make something. In my mind, to design something, you had to have an idea, visualize it, and then make that thing. Had these formal ideas, but they weren't pure formal ideas, because I was seeing other stuff and being like, well, that feels like the thing. And it was always stilted, and it never really felt like it was me enough. I felt like this for a really long time. It wasn't until I got into a kind of stripped down brutalist phase that I started to make stuff that I was like, this feels like me. But now I'm at this point where I'm really interested in formalism, and I understand a methodology for how I can make work that's more formal. So one of the things is the stuff that I do with the producer method or the typographer method. But then the other part of it is realizing that if I want to make work that's more formal and more visual, I have to develop a practice that generates interesting form. So how does that work? There's stuff I do anyway that's not graphic design-y, but it generates things I can use in graphic design. But then right now I'm kind of interested in stuff that is graphic design-y. So doing the exercises that I give to my students, the M thing is kind of inspired by Wolfgang Weingart, who did this series over a long period of time where he worked with the letter M. He just picked M. I don't even know why he picked M, but that was the letter he used, and he did all these experiments. I decided to use the letter M as a homage to him, but not to repeat his experiments. I just opened up an Illustrator file, made an M, and then was like, all right, what could we do with this thing? And a thing I'd done in the past that seemed interesting was to use the halftone filter in Illustrator coupled with gradients. And that has already yielded a lot of stuff that to me is very interesting and feels new to me, even if there's a chance it looks like stuff I've seen, but I'm not trying to create anything I've seen. I'm just trying to play with it and generate a new kind of visual vocabulary. At the same time, making this drawing in InDesign, which I think will be an ongoing thing. It's all about the idea of I want to have a broad range of references of ways I can work that I can then draw on for our work, so that when we're doing something like a typographer method project, that instinctually I can be like, oh cool, well let's do an InDesign composition, and let's do some studies using these effects I'm interested in, and see where they can go, and then know that they'll kind of tweak and they'll build. That's part one of this. This is a thing that I do. Hopefully that provides some value to you, especially if you're a person who, like me, wants to do things that are more visual, but you feel like you don't have visual ideas. The other part of this is I'm super interested in the basics. There's this quote from David Carson that kind of has always popped out to me. I think it's from the interview in the book Second Sight. So I must have seen this in 1996 or 7. But he just said this thing, he's like, it always comes down to the biggest challenge is just black and white typography. And seeing what you can do with that, because the potentials are endless. I love starting with something super basic, the letter M, squares in InDesign. I loved teaching Foundation 2D because we did all these assignments with squares and dots. For me, I constantly come back to the basics because I actually feel like the basics is where I can stretch and grow the most. Every so often I go through and I start doing these typography exercises where it's like a song I heard today. Okay, artist name in that song. Set a timer for 12 minutes, try to make something happen. At another point it'll be grab a show listing from the local alt weekly or whatever. Set a timer for 10 minutes, make a flyer. And I find that if I focus on the basics, but then I repeat it day after day after day, I get bored, and then it starts getting interesting, because it's like no matter how much you try, you have a bag of tricks and you rely on your bag of tricks. So my goal is like just to keep expanding the bag of tricks wider and wider. And what's weird to me is that the elemental stuff seems to be the way to do it. That if I can like just continuously come back to the most basic elements, that gives me a framework to build off of. One other aspect of this that I think is important is I don't want to keep making the same stuff. Like, I'm 42. I went to school around 2000. So professionally, I've been working for, if I could do math, 16 years, plus being in school, so we're like at 19, plus I made zines and records and stuff like in high school. So that's like 20 something years of designing. One of my biggest fears is to always be stuck in a loop of what I was doing at a certain point. And like I saw this all the time with creative directors who like stopped designing, that their frame of reference was therefore, like if they did design something, like let's say like you're a creative director, you don't have to design anymore because your new life is to sit in meetings all day long. Whenever they design, there's only two modes that they have. Here's what's popular at the moment, or here's what I was into around the time that I stopped actually getting involved hands-on in the projects. I so don't want that to happen. I'd rather be bad and me, or bad and interesting, than be safe in this way that was safe 10 years ago. And so doing these low-key projects that are all about the fundamentals or about the basics, I feel like those help me stay fresh, because my tastes change over time. What I determine to be good or not good changes over time. What I determine to be safe will change, and I'll be like, oh my God, like this thing I thought was kind of like crazy. I'm like, nah, it wasn't crazy enough. Not that I need to be crazy per se, but I want to get to places I haven't been, and I want to actually grow. And this is a weird industry where it's hard to grow because commerce kind of limits it, and if you work within a place like an in-house department, you definitely can't grow because you're limited by what the in-house department allows to happen. And when you work at an agency, you're supposed to age out of designing, which is kind of crazy, because if you think about, like, if you get stuck in an agency for long enough, you completely get sucked into this idea that you shouldn't be designing. You should only be telling other people what to do or telling other people what you think. And you can get sucked into this tunnel vision of like, shit, I'm 40 and I still design. This isn't good. And then if you get out of that tunnel vision and you go, shit, Vim Crowell is like 92 and he's an actual graphics designer. Or people that work in book cover design, they never stop designing book covers. It's just this weird slice of the world that teaches you that you should stop. And it makes you stagnate and boring when you do your own work, I think. That's a long one. That's some perspective on a couple things I'm working on at the moment. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but when I do these projects, I am really not trying to do anything. I have an idea of what I'd like to investigate, because it's like I got the M, I got to do something. So what I've been doing is just I do save as, day in and day out. The Illustrator drawing, I'll start with some squares, and then I'm just gonna mess around with the effects palette, and then I'm just gonna work and work and work, and I don't know where it will end up. That to me is how that growth thing works, because you're hoping to get to these unexpected endpoints. It's harder to grow if you are trying to do something that's experimental, but you've defined the endpoint. That's my long ass video for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, hit me up. If you want to see some of this type of stuff, visit the MVA Studio on Instagram. Take it easy.